I'm so excited about this topic. We're going to talk all about negotiation, and especially for women, how you can successfully negotiate your salary. Because, hey, we've all been there. And if you're still that ambitious high achiever that I know you are, then you are likely going to come into that point where you're going to be negotiating your salary again, either in the near future or for your next role, or maybe you're still in the conversation with your organization right now for more salary. So if that's you, then this video is something you definitely want to watch. So let's dive straight into it, because before I share with you what you need to do, I really want to get into where some of the common mistakes are that I have seen happen. So the first one is really around undervaluing yourself. So maybe you found yourself going like, oh my God, like whatever they've offered must be really what my experience and skills are worth. So you've essentially not really gotten clear as to what your ideal outcome is, and what salary and total compensation package you'd want to achieve or want to receive. And then you've just made this automatic assumption that, oh, well, this is what the salary must be, the position must be paying. Let's just accept that. Now, if that's the case, then this is going to help you as well, this video. The second mistake that I see a lot of women make is not negotiating or avoiding the negotiation in itself, because you might be thinking, well, I don't want to seem too greedy. I don't want to come across as someone that, is really high demanding and high maintenance. And I'll just share, because this mistake alone of avoiding negotiation has cost me 4 pay grades and at least 40,000 euros in one of my transitions into a new role. So you don't want to leave that kind of money on the table, because making it up afterwards is extremely difficult. So negotiation, yes, we'll address the elephant in the room here, because negotiating for women and men is different. Men are just perceived differently. If we as women were to be as assertive and as direct often as what men are within a negotiation, yes, it is, research has shown that does not translate well, that is not necessarily reflected well on women for their experience in their next experience, or in their words and I are having fun this today, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a positive impression. But today in this video, I am going to give you a three-step way of doing it, where that you can still powerfully negotiate to your advantage and successfully come out with a good impression and with a really positive experience with your employer. So the third mistake that I often see is really assuming that negotiation is going to lead to a win-lose. Now, there's, of course, a whole bunch of other mistakes that we can talk about, but those are the 3 key ones I want to talk about, and especially this last one about the win-lose. When you perceive negotiation as, okay, one party is going to win and the other one then must, by definition, lose, that is really going to make that negotiation very competitive, and not to mention quite stressful. If that's the perception that you have, or that is the belief you're operating from, then it can make it really difficult to, even if you were to meet halfway, to say, oh, I guess now we both lost, or well, I didn't really get what I wanted, but they didn't get what they wanted, and right. So the key here is to start looking at negotiations as a way to create and co-create a win-win together. Now, here's what happens. So if you have found yourself undervaluing yourself, it's one of the mistake number 1 I shared. 2, you're avoiding to negotiate your salary and your compensation package. Again, this alone for one role cost me 4 pay grades in the pay scale, as well as over 40,000 euros in annual salary. Imagine the holidays I could have taken with that. And number 3 is believing that and acting from the principle that negotiation is win, lose. So there's a winning party and there's a losing party. But here's what happens when you keep going into these mistakes. One, well, you might be initially relieved that you've gotten and accepted an offer, because we all know that excitement when that comes pouring in, right? This offer's like, oh, finally, like we've gone through all the interview process. I have been told I got the role. And now you get really excited, like, ooh, let's see what the offer is. And unfortunately, then it just doesn't really pan out, and it doesn't go the way that you want it to. So you find yourself accepting the offer, right? You didn't negotiate it. You've assumed that whatever they offer you is what your value is. But over time, the resentment is going to start building up, because for you, it is going to be a perceived lack of appropriate compensation for the value and the contribution that you make. I know in my case, with that, when I accepted that role with my pay grades too low, as well as the salary too low, it never got fixed within the organization. And it built up a lot of resentment on my end over the years of like, I'm doing the same work as other colleagues, and yet they're getting paid much, much more because they're also in much higher pay grades. And in order for me to get the shift into that same pay grade, the line was always, well, that's not the company policy. Okay. Number two, what else happens here is you're going to end up leaving money on the table, and not just for that specific year, but the recurring salary that you could have earned and all of the additional benefits along the way. So in order for you to get where you wanted to be, it can take a lot more time and effort as you become stuck in your organization's annual salary review and allowances. Like I said, for me to rectify that with my organization at the time, it became near impossible because there was budget constraints. There was like, oh, we don't promote somebody more than one pay grade at a time. Oh, but you know what? Yeah, it's a mistake, unfortunately, but we can't do anything about it. Company policy. So here's something I want to share with you today. That my clients are using my Leadership Edge method, and those that have been using it over the past months and years have successfully negotiated 8 to 10% or 8 to 20% raises in just the last 6 months. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you my favorite way right now. And with it, you'll be able to set yourself up for a successful salary negotiation. And let's just put it out there for a minute. Salary negotiation is only one piece of negotiation. So within the Leadership Edge method, we talk about negotiation in general as well, and more specifically today's topic of negotiating your salary. Now, what I want you to remember is there's 3 steps I'm going to give you. The first thing that you need to do is your homework. Okay, remember, you don't know necessarily what your end result wants to be. Maybe it's you don't know your own value in the marketplace. So the biggest mistake that women make is not spending the time to determine what the industry or market salary compensation benchmarks are for the role. You might have Google salary expectations with, marketing director salary, but that's it. So then you make this assumption that, hey, the company is going to offer me a competitive salary, right? And you might also think, well, they've got pay scales. I've got to be stuck in the pay scales. Well, there's lots of way to negotiate, right? So when you fail to research industry standards, the company salary ranges, if you can figure that out through your network, or neglect to even assess what your own value and the contribution and the ROI that you're going to be bringing to that organization, it leads to either requests that are either going to be too high or too low. Why too high? Well, maybe you didn't factor in that this is a startup, that the budget necessarily isn't going to be quite as high right now, but that there are extra additional ways of compensation that are not just salary, but maybe it's shares, or maybe it's a more challenging role, or maybe it's flexibility, right? So this is where your homework is important, because without the groundwork, you risk being undervalued or dismissed, and you reinforce that cycle of not really being adequately compensated for your worth. So the first thing you need to focus on is determining what your own salary and total compensation objectives are. What is the minimum salary that you will accept? And again, research salary benchmarks within your industry, within your role, and understand that your company's compensation philosophy and where your current salary stands in comparison. This takes homework. This takes having conversations. I learned from my first mistake. And what I would do is, especially if I knew people that were working at the organization that I was, especially if you're from the outside, right? You're an external hire, is I would talk to people that are within the organization and start asking them, like, all right, so what does the pay structure look like? What are the pay scales? What can you share with me? What is the compensation like? Because that allowed me to come in with a much more informed and better way of structuring that conversation and going into that negotiation. So if you can think about it, it's like Sheryl Sandberg, I think of the name there for a second, from Facebook. She didn't just hope for the best. She started doing her homework and then really negotiated it based off of all the things, the value and experience and the contribution she was going to make, in order to create a compensation package that was both accepted by Facebook, but also was great for herself as well. Again, creating a win-win. So you want to discover and continue to look for how your you can position your salary negotiation as a win-win. Now, this is where the second step comes in. This is about framing that ask. So remember when I said that for women, salary negotiation can be really a little bit tricky. And this is because when women ask for themselves, this has a lot to do with like, well, society expects, so I'm not talking that every woman has this thing, right? That you can't be more self-centered or selfish. And it's not selfish, it's taking care of yourself. But society really has this perception of women, and it's very pervasive, that women should be focused more on others, right? So this is why women are celebrated for their team collaboration and their compassion. But when it comes to negotiating your salary, that's a very me, very, perceived as a very selfish piece. Whereas for men, it's very accepted to be much more individualistic and much more focused on themselves. So they can do this much more directly in a sense. So we're not going to avoid the salary negotiation. No. What we're going to do is frame the request. So I want you to approach the negotiation rather than approaching as a demand, look at it as a dialogue that you could open up to find a way to come to a collaborative and a better outcome for both of you. So you want to frame your request and your ask by highlighting your contributions, for example, expressing your desire for fair compensation that reflects your values to the company, as well as, what's accepted within the market. And again, approach the conversation with openness for a dialogue. Listen to the feedback that you're going to get from your negotiation partner, and negotiate terms that benefit both parties. So if you don't frame this ask and you approach it more as a demand than as a collaborative effort, you're going to find resistance, because then that's where it comes up like, oh my God, she's really demanding. And one thing I also want to highlight that I didn't even put in my notes for this today is remember, especially if you're in a role, if you're, in the conversation for a role or going to step into a new role that requires negotiation, see this also as an opportunity to show your negotiation chops. So if you're in sales and you are responsible for driving new business, bringing new business in, negotiating contracts for clients, we'll see this as the same in the essence of like, hey, you know what? this is going to also reflect a bit your style of negotiation. So let's frame the ask. Let's make sure that you find a way to bring it to something that works for both of you. Because in sales or with a client or with a supplier, that's what you do as well. You want to find an outcome that works for both parties. Now, the last step I want to give you is timing, because poor timing might result in a failed negotiation, but it can also impact how you're perceived and how you're understood within the business environment. So let's talk about timing in the sense of, hey, if you're already coming up to your salary review, then you might not want to time it every month going, okay, well, let's talk about my salary. That can be timed for example, performance review rounds. That could be, hey, I know that maybe it's you take it a couple of months before the performance review actually really takes place and start laying the groundwork. When it comes to within a negotiation for a new role in a new organization, that's an external hire, you don't want to start the negotiation for your salary or compensation package at the very first interview. You want to wait until they're fully invested in you being the right candidate for the role. And then you want to start having that moment of let's move towards talking about what the compensation is going to look like. And within an organization, again, yes, do it as you're coming up to your performance reviews, but you also want to make sure that you've consistently demonstrated your own value and make sure that the company is in a really stable and prosperous phase, because that can also backfire if your company is in hot water, is this really struggling to then all of a sudden have this, hey, let's talk about my salary. It needs like a 10 or 20% bump. That doesn't really show that you've got a great business acumen at that moment of being able to understand what is possible and when that ask should be in the right place. So regardless, I want you to make sure that you're tracking your achievements, especially if you're in the organization, and the impact on the team as well as the company's success, because this is all additional evidence. And these are your, persuasive arguments in order to support your ask, right? In order to support your negotiation for your salary. I want you to think about all this process. Now I've created a little process where I call to get these 3 steps so you can remember them. Just think of a hat, right? One you put on your head. The H is for homework, right? You want to do your homework. The second step is framing the ask. So make sure you're asking for it and look to make it collaborative, not a demand. Make it a discussion, not a demand. Number 3 is timing. You need to time it right. So not at the very beginning of a interview process, but at the end when the company's fully invested in you being the right candidate, or after you have consistently demonstrated your value to the company and you bring all of those achievements forward as building the business case for your salary increase. And think about it for yourself. In total, this whole process of negotiating a salary, it's like harvesting a crop. You want to reap the rewards of all the pieces you've seeded along the way. So all those seeds you planted over the year, especially if you're in the company or throughout the interview process, you want to start harvesting it when it's the right time and it's going to get you the most for your efforts. And you want to ensure, for example, when you're in a company, that the company's already benefiting from your contributions and is in a position to invest more. Now, I talked a little bit about Sheryl Sandberg at the beginning, the former COO of Facebook. And she's a great example of those 3 steps in action in how she negotiated her salary with Mark Zuckerberg. She did her homework, she knew her value and the market's salary standards, and then she framed her ask collaboratively, expressing her eagerness to join Facebook, but also emphasizing the need for fair compensation. And her negotiation led to improved terms that reflected both her worth and the value that she would bring to the company. So here comes the moment, right? Let me ask you, do you want to continue avoiding negotiating a higher salary, Or do you want to become that sought after strategic leader who's compensated for her value, experience, and skills that you bring to the job, just like your male colleagues do as well? Now, if this is you, don't worry, I've helped over 65 plus women leaders over the past 3.5 years, just like you, with my courses and programs. And I want you to DM me salary when you're ready to negotiate a salary that reflects your value and your contribution to your organization. And hey, just to give you an insight, I had a client in my Leadership Accelerator program who was told she would have to wait at least a year before she would see a salary increase. She, with the support of the tools, the techniques, and the coaching within the Leadership Accelerator program, realized that result within 4 months. Now, who wouldn't want to have that? If that's you, again, DM me salary and let's have a conversation. If you've got any other questions, please drop them below in the comments or send me a DM. Always happy to read the questions there and help you out where I can. Thank you so much for listening. And